Humans accidentally enter a galactic empire, and they're not impressed. Admiral Callum Voss sat in the command chair of the USS Endeavour, tapping his fingers against the armrest as he stared at the swirling maelstrom of hyperspace outside the bridge's viewport. The ship had been running a long-range exploration mission outside Sol-controlled space, mapping uncharted regions of the Orion Arm. Everything had been routine, until it wasn't. A navigational glitch. A sudden violent lurch. And now they were somewhere else. "Commander Hale," Voss said, voice steady despite the tension on the bridge. "Where the hell are we?" Hale's hands danced over the holo display, scanning incoming data. The ship's AI, Sigma, processed star positions, comparing them to every known chart in human databases. A silence stretched over the bridge before Hale swallowed. "Admiral, these readings don't match anything in our records." That made Voss sit forward. "How far off are we talking?" "Unknown," Sigma replied in a synthetic, calm voice. "We are detecting over 50 habitable systems nearby, all within close proximity. This is an established, structured civilization. But..." Voss caught the hesitation. "But what?" "No recognizable galactic signatures. No known factions. These aren't the Nanari, the Taluan, or the Azar Dominion. Admiral, we've stumbled into an empire we've never encountered before." Voss exhaled. "Wonderful." A ping lit up the holo display. "Incoming ships. A lot of them." "Multiple vessels approaching, Admiral," Hale said, eyes narrowing. "They're hailing us." On screen. The display shifted, revealing an alien figure sitting atop an absurdly ornate golden throne. The creature had 6 eyes, 4 arms, and wore a cloak made of shimmering iridescent scales. Its crown was so large and encrusted with jewels that it looked like it could snap its neck at any moment. The alien regarded them with smug amusement. "You have trespassed into the domain of the Grand Imperium of Corythax," it intoned grandly. "Kneel before the might of the Supreme Overlord Krovnoctis and surrender your vessel for inspection." Voss blinked. Hale coughed. "Oh, sir." Voss took a slow breath. This was going to be a problem. The alien fleet was massive. Hundreds of capital ships formed an imposing wall ahead, their gunmetal hulls glowing with energy signatures. But despite their numbers, something about them felt off. The way they moved, the formation they held, it screamed intimidation, not practicality. "Sigma," Voss said, keeping his tone neutral. "Assess their tech." "Scanning. Assessing. Comparative analysis complete." Pause. Then. "This fleet is impressive looking but technologically inferior to modern Terran battle groups." Hale frowned. "Inferior how exactly?" "They're flying floating fortresses rather than optimized warships," Sigma explained. "Heavily ornamented hulls, inefficient power distributions, outdated weapons technology. They focus on aesthetic intimidation rather than raw combat efficiency." Voss leaned back, exhaling. "So, in short, we stumbled into the intergalactic equivalent of an over-decorated, self-important monarchy?" Hale stifled a laugh. The alien ruler scowled through the screen. "You dare delay your surrender?" Voss didn't even blink. "I don't even know who you are." "I am Emissary Garzul, voice of the Supreme Overlord. Kneel, Outlanders. You now belong to the Imperium." Voss tilted his head, glancing back at Sigma. "Are they serious?" "It appears they are." Silence stretched. Then Voss snorted. Actually snorted. Hale covered his mouth, trying not to burst into laughter. The Endeavour crew stared at their commander, eyes widening. Did the Admiral just laugh at the first contact with a powerful alien empire? The emissary's 6 eyes twitched in growing outrage. "You find something amusing about your impending subjugation?" Voss wiped his face, shaking his head. "Look, pal. We're just explorers. We didn't come here to cause trouble. But if you think I'm going to kneel because some overgrown space baron demanded it, you've got another thing coming." "You insolent." "Save it," Voss interrupted. "We're leaving." He gestured to Hale, who cut the transmission. The view screen flicked back to the star-filled expanse, where the Imperium ships were beginning to reposition as if they were preparing to fire. "Sir," Hale said, voice still carrying an amused edge, "they're locking weapons on us." Voss sighed. "Of course they are." The Imperium's fleet was not built for actual war, it was built for spectacle. That became obvious the second they opened fire. Massive energy lances roared toward the Endeavour, glowing with the force of a small sun. But Sigma calmly adjusted the ship's shields, absorbing the blast with only minimal power redistribution. "Shields at 98% efficiency," Sigma reported. "Their weapons are dramatically inefficient." That's their heavy artillery? Hale said incredulously. I've seen asteroid mining lasers hit harder. Admiral, Sigma interjected, I calculate a 99.8% probability that the Imperium has never fought an equal opponent in recorded history. Their doctrine revolves around psychological warfare rather than actual battlefield superiority. Voss rubbed his temples. They're a paper tiger. Essentially, yes. The Imperium fleet continued to fire, but the Endeavour barely registered the impacts. Their weapons were bright, loud, and showy, but practically useless against advanced Terran shielding. On the view screen, the Imperium emissary's face was contorting into something that looked both furious and horrified. You will submit. Garzol shrieked. Voss cracked his neck, adjusting his uniform. Sigma, open comms. Channel open. Voss leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. Listen, Garzol. I'm only going to say this once. He gestured vaguely at the battlefield. This isn't a fight. It's an embarrassment. You've never fought anyone who wasn't already terrified of you, have you? The alien sputtered. We are the most feared empire in the cosmos. Voss nodded sagely. Sure. And I bet all your previous conquests just so happened to surrender before firing a single shot, huh? Garzol's silence was very telling. Voss smirked. Tell your supreme overlord that humanity isn't impressed. Then he made a casual, dismissive gesture. Sigma, show them what real firepower looks like. The Endeavour didn't need to fire to win this battle. Instead, Sigma activated the ship's experimental gravrail system, sending out a controlled pulse across local space. Instantly, every single Imperium warship within range found itself shoved backward, hard. The Imperium fleet tumbled into complete chaos. Some ships spun wildly. Others collided into each other. And the most poorly designed vessels simply broke apart under their own weight. Not a single shot fired. Just pure technological superiority. Back on the Imperium command bridge, Emissary Garzol's face had gone completely pale. Voss smiled. You were saying? Garzol opened and closed his mouth, completely speechless. Voss clapped his hands together. Well, this has been fun, but I think we'll be going now. The Endeavour spun gracefully, its engines glowing blue as it prepared to leave. The Imperium fleet, or what remained of it, made no move to stop them. Because for the first time in their history, the mighty galactic empire of Korathax had encountered an enemy they couldn't intimidate. And they had no idea what to do about it. For a full 3 minutes, nobody in the Korathax Grand Imperium spoke. Emissary Garzol's 6 eyes twitched as he stared at the human warship, now drifting at the system's edge, entirely unbothered by the Imperium's display of force. No, not just unbothered, amused. The humans had mocked their might. They had laughed. And worst of all, they had proven they were right to do so. Garzol turned to his subordinates, who were all frozen in place, their gazes darting between one another like frightened animals. His throat clicked in frustration. Someone called the Supreme Overlord. Silence. Then a hesitant voice. Are you certain, Excellency? Garzol bared his fangs. Do I look uncertain? One of the technicians scrambled to open a direct transmission. Moments later, the largest screen on the bridge flickered to life, revealing the Supreme Overlord Krav Noctis, the self-proclaimed ruler of the Grand Imperium. His form was draped in 3 layers of ceremonial robes, each woven with impossible patterns of gold and crimson. His crown extended a full meter above his head, supported by 2 attendants to prevent it from toppling over. His voice, amplified by unseen technologies, boomed through the chamber like a god's decree. Emissary Garzol, why do you disturb me? Garzol swallowed. Your Exalted Eminence, we have encountered a problem. There was a pause. I assume you mean the primitive interlopers you just encountered? I have already begun preparing the official surrender decree for them to sign. How much tribute shall we demand? Garzol hesitated. We may need to reconsider. The Supreme Overlord's many eyes narrowed. Explain. Garzol forced himself to remain composed. The humans refused our demand for submission. Then they disabled half our fleet without firing a single shot. There was a very long silence. What? Garzol twitched. They possess technology beyond our own. Their ship withstood our full bombardment without issue. And then, using an unknown form of gravity-based weaponry, they rendered us helpless. We could not pursue. We could not retaliate. For the first time in Imperium history, the Supreme Overlord of Korathax seemed at a loss for words. What manner of nightmare species have we just encountered? Garzol exhaled. A very serious problem, my lord. Meanwhile, aboard the Endeavour, Voss sat in the captain's quarters, sipping a steaming mug of coffee as the rest of the bridge crew went over the mountain of data gathered from their first contact. Hale was the first to break the silence. Sir, do you think they'll try something else? Oh, no doubt, Voss said casually. The moment they get over their bruised ego, they'll throw another tantrum. Hale smirked. And if they send more ships? Voss sipped his coffee. Then we'll embarrass them again. Sigma's voice interrupted. Admiral, I have analyzed Imperium communications. They are currently in full crisis mode. Voss raised a brow. How bad? The AI projected a feed of panic transmissions across Imperium space. News reports, high-level debates, and intercepted command messages all revolved around one subject: the Terran threat. The humans did not kneel. The humans ignored the Supreme Overlord's decree. The humans mocked our military. The humans disabled an entire fleet with a single maneuver. Voss leaned back. They're afraid of us. Hale let out a low whistle. I mean, to be fair, they should be. Sigma continued. I am detecting new movements in the Imperium's chain of command. There is infighting among their ruling class. Some believe war is inevitable. Others seem to believe we are gods. Voss nearly choked on his coffee. Wait, what? Sigma expanded the display, highlighting Imperium scholars and religious figures making wild proclamations. Their technology is beyond understanding. They defeated our fleet without war. They arrived from an unknown place, bearing unknowable power. They did not kneel, because we are beneath them. Voss ran a hand down his face. Oh, for... Hale burst out laughing. Sir, I think we just accidentally started a religion. Voss sighed. We were just trying to leave. Sigma spoke again. New development. The Supreme Overlord has declared an Imperium-wide emergency meeting. They are debating whether to sue for peace, escalate, or surrender entirely. Voss smirked. Guess they're realizing they picked a fight with the wrong species. Hale tapped the screen. What do you think they'll choose? Voss exhaled. They'll double down. Hale blinked. You think so? Voss nodded. They're an empire built on fear. If they admit weakness, they collapse. Which means they'll try to save face by picking a fight they can't win. The bridge fell silent as one undeniable fact sank in. The Imperium wasn't backing down. They were going to escalate. And humanity was going to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, why that was the worst mistake they could ever make. Supreme Overlord Krov Noctis gripped the edges of his throne, his claws digging into the ornate golden armrests. The High Command stood before him, shifting nervously, their gazes darting between one another. Finally, Grand Marshal HFY, the Imperium's most decorated military strategist, stepped forward. His exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber's lights, his mandibles clicking with uncertainty. Your Exalted Eminence, he began cautiously, the Senate is demanding a decisive response to the Terran insult. Krov Noctis narrowed his eyes. And what, exactly, does the Senate believe we should do? HFY hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, he straightened his posture and declared. They demand total war. Silence. Then, Krov Noctis threw back his head and laughed. A low, cruel, guttural sound that echoed through the throne chamber. Oh, he hissed, I hope they demand war. I would enjoy watching them justify it. HFY blinked. Your Eminence? Krov Noctis leaned forward, his massive form casting a long shadow. Let us pretend for a moment that we launch a full-scale campaign against these humans. His voice dripped with venom. Tell me, Grand Marshal, what happens next? HFY hesitated. We overwhelm them with sheer numbers? Krov Noctis smiled. It was not a kind smile. The fleet we sent to intimidate them. Remind me, Grand Marshal, how many ships did it consist of? HFY swallowed. 200, Your Eminence. And how many did the humans destroy? None. Krov Noctis tilted his head. And yet we lost. We were humiliated, incapacitated, left drifting like helpless hatchlings. So I ask again, Grand Marshal, if we go to war, what happens next? HFY didn't answer. Because he already knew. The Imperium loses. The humans had effortlessly disabled an entire fleet. And the worst part? They weren't even trying. Krov Noctis clicked his claws against the throne. So tell me, Grand Marshal, if we go to war, what exactly do you plan to do when the humans decide to stop playing with us? HFY said nothing, because he had no plan. Meanwhile, on the Endeavour, Hale nearly spit out his drink when the transmission came through. Sir, you're gonna want to see this. Voss glanced up from his terminal. What now? Hale grinned, throwing the Imperium's latest declaration onto the main display. Imperial Decree. Due to the human refusal to submit, the Grand Imperium officially declares them a hostile state. All Imperial forces are to prepare for total military engagement. Hale barely contained his laughter. They just declared war on us. Voss sighed, rubbing his temples. Of course they did. Sigma's voice cut in, amusement somehow laced into the AI's tone. Admiral, I have calculated the probability of an Imperial victory at less than 0.001%. Voss smirked. That high, huh? Hale snickered. Sir, permission to send them a response? Voss leaned back in his chair. You know what? Sure. What do you have in mind? Hale's grin widened as he began typing. Imperium Command, 15 minutes later. Garzol read the human transmission once, then twice. Then he turned pale. What does it say? Demanded one of the officers. Garzol's mandibles twitched. Then in a strained voice he read it aloud. To the Korathax Grand Imperium? War? Are you sure? We were just passing through. We weren't even paying attention to you. But if you really want our attention, fine. Let's see how long you last. Humanity. Silence fell across the command chamber. Then a single officer whispered the words everyone was thinking. What have we done? Garzol didn't answer, because deep down he already knew. The Imperium had just made the biggest mistake in its history. So, all of them would pay the price. For the first time in millennia, the Korathax Grand Imperium knew fear. Not war. Not battle. Fear. Because war meant fighting. War meant an enemy that played by the same rules. The humans did not play by the same rules. Imperial High Command, 72 hours after the declaration. Supreme Overlord Krovnoctis stared at the void beyond the command deck's viewport. His golden throne sat abandoned behind him. The stars, once symbols of imperial dominion, now felt distant, mocking. He had ordered total war, and humanity had answered. It had started with the Imperial Communication Network. Every relay, every encrypted channel, every secure line went dark. Instantaneously. Not jammed. Not destroyed. The humans now controlled Imperial communications better than the Imperium itself. Then came the disruptions. Entire fleets found their navigation systems subtly altered. Orders intercepted. Supplies rerouted. At first, commanders assumed incompetence. Then ships vanished. Destroyed? Captured? No one knew. Because the humans didn't broadcast victories. They didn't declare conquests. They didn't even respond. It was as if humanity had simply decided that the Imperium no longer existed, and reality was adjusting accordingly. Now, Krovnoctis watched as the largest Imperial fleet ever assembled drifted powerless. 2,000 warships. Their weapons disabled. Their systems offline. Their crews paralyzed in an endless gravity loop, trapped in a perpetual state of freefall, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything except drift in silent terror. The Imperium had never encountered anything like this. There were no demands. There was no invasion. Humanity had simply decided to win. And so they had. Human Command, the bridge of the Endeavor. Sir, Sigma announced, Imperial forces have initiated emergency protocols. Admiral Voss raised an eyebrow. What kind of emergency protocols? Hale chuckled. The kind where they start begging. Sigma confirmed. The Supreme Overlord has transmitted a universal distress signal. He has declared an immediate cessation of hostilities and is requesting an audience to negotiate terms. Voss exhaled slowly. He glanced at the holo display. The once mighty Imperium's forces were now ghosts in their own empire, stranded, leaderless, powerless. The entire war had lasted 3 days. No human ships had been lost. No human soldiers had even been deployed. Hale smirked. So, what's the play, sir? Do we respond? Voss took a sip of his coffee, then shrugged. Nah. Imperial Palace, 5 days later. Krovnoctis had not slept. Not since the war had begun. Not since the war had ended. Because it had ended. He knew it had ended. But the humans had not acknowledged it. That was worse. So much worse. For 5 days the Imperium had broadcast pleas, concessions, unconditional surrender, and received nothing. No invasion. No ultimatums. No response. Just silence. The Imperium had spent centuries demanding submission from lesser races. They had spent millennia enforcing the hierarchy of power. Now, for the first time, they were beneath notice. Krav Noctis trembled, because it was no longer a question of what humanity would do next. It was a question of whether humanity even remembered they existed. And that was true terror. Human Observation Post, Deep Space. Lieutenant Commander Hale stretched his arms, yawning as he leaned back in his chair. Sigma flickered to life beside him. The Imperium has attempted another distress broadcast. Shall I mark it as spam? Hale grinned. Yeah, mark it as spam. He leaned back watching the stars. They'll figure it out eventually. The end. Enjoying the story? Don't miss out. Red circle. White heavy checkmark. Subscribe now and join the resistance. Rocket fire. White heavy checkmark. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an epic HFY tale. Bell. White heavy checkmark. Like and share to spread the defiance. Flex biceps. Alien, the galactic war is just beginning. Are you ready? Red triangle pointed down. Subscribe now. Red triangle pointed down.